The views and opinions shared on Taken Too Soon are those of the guest and don't necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the host and contributors. This podcast discusses mature themes and may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Previously on Taken Too Soon.
I mean, people loved her. She had such a sweet personality.
She was a good person. I mean, truly good.
Angie Baker called and wanted to know if we had seen or heard anything from Holly. And we hadn't.
I said, will you ask Dwayne if he would walk around the property and see if she's not there? I said, she's there. They must have just got to the house and he got out and just walked to where she was.
You don't really consider death until it steps into your life, and then you have to find your own way to come to terms with that.
He said somebody killed her. I know she would have never left me. And I said, no, she wouldn't have, Logan.
In 2014, Holly Fox Strickland vanished. 5 days later, her body was discovered just steps away from her own home.
Despite the time, despite the distance, the case remains unsolved. Today, we examine the investigation from the perspective of one of the people closest to it, a former Hall County investigator, Ashley Gilleland.
Her work on this case reveals the heartbreak and frustration behind so many cold cases, and what hope may still remain.
My name is Ashley Gilleland, formerly Corwin. That's what I was known when I worked in Hall County. I had always wanted to be an investigator since I was little, which is maybe weird, I don't know. So when I went to college, I wanted to go to a college that had a body farm, as morbid as that sounds. And University of Tennessee was out of state for me and too expensive. So I lived in North Carolina, so I went to Western Carolina University in the mountains, North Carolina. So got my degree there and then moved to Georgia and got a job with Hall County. I started off in the jail like most people do, and then ended up working there for a year and a half, went to the police academy, and then I knew I didn't want to work the road. I didn't want to write tickets. I didn't want to do any of that. Just wanted to be an investigator. And so position came open, got in, had to start in property, worked myself up to, working in the persons crime division. And then that's where I stayed until I got a call one day that just said, hey, can I throw your name out there? They had this new position. You sound like you would be perfect for the job. And so I said, sure, why not? And then got the job. I put in like an 8-week notice at Hall County, tried to finish up all the cases, provided all the information that I had on all my cases, if there were any that were open, and went on and to work in a DA's office as an investigator.
Cold cases are hard. And for the investigators trying to work them, the challenges go far beyond just the passage of time. Former Hall County investigator Ashley Gilleland knows this all too well.
With limited resources and mounting workloads, investigators are often left with only fragments to work with. Fragments of a life, of a scene, of a truth that has gone quiet.
For Holly's case, the biggest challenge wasn't just the time, it was the stillness. The silence from those who might have known something, and the lingering fear that whoever did this was still nearby.
I had been working with an investigator, the second investigator at the time, and kind of helping her, watching interviews that she had done on the case. And then she got promoted. And so once she got promoted, then that's when the case kind of became mine. Because it had been a year or so, maybe a little over a year, maybe even 2 years since the incident happened, it wasn't something that was worked on every single day. So it was kind of like you have your cases that come out right then, and then that's what you work on in the moment. And then that was kind of something that you kind of picked up on or waited for records to come in type of thing.
I know with talking with the investigator, Dan Franklin, who I now think is at the head of the division, the usual policy on a lot of these cold cases is that Fridays would often get set aside to, that's going to be the day that I look into some of these case files, or I'm going to try to run down something that I haven't on one of these older cases. Maybe if they're not considered cold, but cases that have been sitting on the desk for a little bit. Is that the policy at the time?
I don't know if there was an actual policy in place. I remember when I worked the case, Thursdays was just an easy day for me instead of Fridays. So it wasn't something that our supervisor sat down and said, okay, every week this day, you need to be working on this case. We had a monthly case review at the time. And so during the monthly case review, if you had a case that was significantly long and had been open for a while, that was something that you had to have next steps, plans for. What are you working on now? And, what can I do to help? That sort of thing. So it wasn't Fridays for me, it was Thursdays. But, things could change too. When you work a heavy caseload and you're on call, sometimes I might have been called out in the middle of the night, the Wednesday night. And so that Thursday I didn't get to dedicate the time to that. So it just kind of depends.
So what did you do at the beginning to get the lay of the land on Holly's case?
Basically, there was, back then it was all like paper, but you just go through the case as a whole. When the investigator that I was working with, the second investigator on the case, when she had the case, I sat down with her when she reviewed it. So we kind of reviewed it together. We took however long it took, I don't even remember, set aside time, went to the conference room, laid everything out, read through all the documents. If there were any interviews associated with the case, we'd watch the interviews and then kind of come up with a plan. What next steps are there? Who do we need to talk to? What do we need to do?
And when you did this review, was there anything that kind of stuck out to you initially when you first started reviewing this case that you were like, oh, that might be something we need to look into?
I mean, at the time, I started investigations in March of 2014. So maybe a month after this incident had happened. So I was very new. And even when I started helping with the case, I was again still very new, a year or two in. To me, that's still pretty new. So I don't know if I knew anything in the beginning of what stuck out. It was really just kind of wrapping my mind around everything that had been done, who were the key players in the case, and then the motive. Like what is a reason for, Holly to be killed? And then I remember looking through the records and thinking that there's some search warrants that could be done.
In any missing person case, the digital trail matters. For Holly, her phone records became one of the most critical pieces of evidence.
Her last known communication was a phone call to someone very familiar, her estranged husband, Dusty Strickland. It wasn't the only thing that pointed in his direction, but it was the last known action Holly took before she disappeared.
Even more troubling, Holly's phone was never recovered. A crucial piece of the puzzle, gone without a trace. Whoever took it, if it was taken, may have known exactly what they were doing.
We do know that the one thing that was missing was her phone. Is that correct?
Her phone was missing, yes. And her phone records, they had already gotten her phone records at the time. And so looking through those too was something to be done, with a fresh set of eyes. As technology progresses, there's different ways that you can look at phone records. There's easier ways to interpret them instead of trying to map them out. They're usually put into not Eastern time zone. So usually you have to kind of translate those yourselves. But now there are programs that help with that, which was good.
Was there anything that you were able to glean from those records that has aided the investigation?
I think that the records were very important just because, everyone has a phone. And so you want to see what the last activity on the phone was. When was it potentially turned off? When did you stop seeing any kind of location data associated with the phone? I don't remember specific location wise. I think the phone was turned off pretty soon afterward. A friend of Holly's had texted her, and I think she may have texted back once, but then stopped at a certain time. So that was important to know. She would always text her friend back. So, that's kind of a flag to go back and look for like the time. Like when was the last time that she possibly stopped communicating? I think there was a call to her estranged husband at the time, which was, interesting. So I think that was something to focus on in the beginning. And those are just the two things that stick out in my mind. And I don't remember if one was before the other or the exact time, like just without, looking back through my notes.
But those are toward the end of the phone records.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, those were like the last ones before the phone just started going to voicemail, which would just lead you to believe that it was turned off or died.
And do you recall how long that was, or roughly how long that was in terms of between last contact and it going dead or going to voicemail?
Again, I don't want to misspeak. I don't remember the time frame because we, with, like I said, with the records, they weren't in Eastern Standard, so we had to translate them back to Eastern Standard Time. So I can't remember the times.
But do you recall it wasn't like during those 5 days of missing period?
No, it was that night.
Okay.
I do remember that.
Right.
Yeah, it wasn't.
So at some point that night, the phone either died or was turned off on purpose. Like,
correct.
One of the two things that night.
Did y'all ever get a firm idea of what happened to Holly's phone?
I don't know if there was ever a firm idea. I know that the scene was, looked at, analyzed, tried to collect everything that was on or near the scene, and it was never found. And I know they initially searched the house and there was nothing, her phone was never found there. So I think as far as what happened to it, it just was gone. So you could just kind of maybe have a guess that, whoever killed her took it with them for whatever reason, or took it and disposed of it, or was just not there.
Do we know what kind of phone it was?
I don't recall, to be honest. I don't remember what type of phone it was. I mean, it's obviously in the investigation, and there was the IMEI number. We definitely had that. So we definitely knew what kind of phone it was, but I just don't remember off the top of my head. And she was, also went missing on the 3rd and found on the 8th. So you're talking 5 days. So
yeah, someone could have come through during those 5 days and maybe not come across her body, but come across her phone and been like, oh, there's a phone, I'm going to take that, kind of a thing.
Yeah, could be really anything.
What about Dusty Strickland? Did you interview him, or was he interviewed in the initial investigations when you did the review of the case?
He was interviewed in the initial investigation, and I think he came in several times. I think he was also cooperative, and I did interview him as well.
Did anything interesting come out of that interview, or is that anything that you can talk about, like that interview with Dusty? I guess kind of what I'm leading to is, was he ever eliminated as a suspect?
I don't know if, I know the term, this person's been eliminated, this suspect's been eliminated in all kinds of cases. And I feel like, just me personally, not necessarily anything related to this case, but I don't think that you can say anyone is eliminated in an open case, in an open investigation. Certainly not on the record. I think there was a lot of information gathered from his interview, and a lot of information that could be helpful for, future investigations.
Dusty wasn't the only person investigators looked into.
His parents, Danny and Angie Baker, were also part of the scrutiny, as was Dusty's girlfriend at the time.
Each of them had ties to Holly, and Danny Baker and Dusty's girlfriend at the time both owned firearms.
From my recollection, I know that Mr. Baker did have guns. I'm not aware if any of those were collected. I'm not aware of what kind they were. None of that was in the investigation stuff that I reviewed, so I don't know. I just knew that he was a gun owner. And then Dusty was not. I believe that he couldn't be by law. His girlfriend at the time was a gun owner and then couldn't be at some point by law. But those are the two that stick out to me that I remember being gun owners from just the people, just the players from the investigation.
We won't speculate on whether one of them is the one who pulled the trigger, and the caliber of the bullet used was never disclosed publicly.
That's often a strategic move, something investigators keep close to the chest so that they can verify tips or confessions against details only the killer would know.
but we do know that the bullet was found to be fragmented when the medical examiner performed the autopsy, and that could make determining the caliber of the bullet difficult.
We also know the people closest to Holly, those within her immediate orbit, were among the first to be questioned.
Obviously, Holly lived with her in-laws, with her daughter and her son. They all lived at the house together. Her in-laws being Danny and Angie Baker, and which were Dusty Strickland's parents, or mom and stepdad. And Dusty Strickland, him and Holly were married. They had one child together. And so those were initially, just the initial names in the investigation. Then you kind of branched out and you tried to figure out, okay, well, who was Holly friends with? Who did she spend the most time with? She had a boyfriend at the time. So that was a name that came up as far as, obviously just want to talk to him to see, how close they were, what sort of relationship they had. And then, coworkers, she was always at work. So there were a lot of coworkers that knew her. So those were also names that came up. It's kind of like a web. So you start with one and then you hear, who do these people hang out with? And then it branches out that way. So for example, you find out Holly, find out who she's associated with. So you find out her husband or her ex-husband or whoever, and then you go to their circles and find out who are they associated with, and could they be involved. In the beginning of an investigation, you just want to talk to anybody and everybody, basically.
When you're coming onto the case, do you know who are the last people to talk to Holly, either on the phone or in person?
Yes, when reviewing the case, I did see, obviously through the phone records from Holly's phone records, and then also just from the initial investigation when they spoke with family members at the house. So they knew kind of when Holly came home from work that day, like what time she came home from work, what she was doing when she came home from work, and then the last time her kids talked to her or saw her. So yeah, that was all part of the initial investigation.
And in that investigation, when you first met the in-laws, how would you describe that dynamic as you saw it between Holly and the Bakers, with her living in their house, et cetera? Did you look at that dynamic between the in-laws and Holly? I guess is kind of what I'm asking.
Yes, and I think the initial investigation, there was already some, interviews conducted and done with different members of the family to find out that dynamic. So then, and you hear from different perspectives. So you hear from Holly's family's perspective, then you hear from Dusty's family's perspective. I did find it unusual in the beginning, just because it's not every day that you're still married, but you haven't literally been with him for several years, but you're living with his parents. So that was just kind of an interesting thing, even in the beginning, because it just doesn't seem like a normal situation. But it seemed like that the Bakers really cared for their granddaughter. And so they wanted her, her to have a place to live. And so in the beginning, I think that the dynamic was they didn't want her to be out on the street. They didn't want her to have to struggle. And it was just an easier kind of way to help her and the kids out by her living there. So it didn't seem stressed, I guess, just reading through the initial file. But I do think that the Bakers did not want Holly to take the kids and move away. Like, I think they wanted them to stay there.
And based on what you just said, that kind of throws out a motive, right? Like custody could be a motive in this case. Did you look into that? Like, were the Bakers considered suspects early in the investigation? Maybe not so much in yours, but in the initial, was it mentioned that they could be possible suspects?
I think in the initial investigation, everybody's a suspect, right? I mean, and that's just any case, not just this one specifically. If you don't know what happened and you don't know the why, then you have to treat everybody kind of that way. And I think that kind of makes things difficult, because if you're coming out of a family member who does nothing but try to take care of the family and you're looking at them as a suspect, then they're going to get very defensive. So I think even in the beginning, everybody was kind of treated that way, which could be why the Bakers became kind of more resistant after the fact. But they were cooperative, with the initial investigation. And even when the second investigator came on, they willingly came in when asked and provided statements.
So going back to the strange dynamic that was happening, Holly was seeing someone at the time, but we know for a fact that Dusty was seeing someone at the time as well. Was that person talked to by law enforcement or interviewed by law enforcement about the case?
She was. She was part of the initial investigation and was interviewed by the investigator or someone in the investigations division during the beginning. Yes, and she was cooperative during the beginning parts of the investigation.
You keep saying that at the beginning they were cooperative. As the investigation went longer, did the Bakers and Dusty and his girlfriend start to back away from being cooperative?
I wouldn't say necessarily that everybody backed away and wasn't cooperative. The Bakers specifically, I think they just didn't want... I don't know if they didn't want anything to do with it anymore or if they just kind of wanted to move on with their lives. Like, I'm not sure their reasonings. They specifically wouldn't, didn't really want to talk. It could be just because, like I said before, everybody in the beginning was treated as a suspect. So I think maybe they just felt like they were being targeted. So I don't know if that's the reason or they just didn't want, like I said, just wanted to move on. As far as Dusty goes and his girlfriend at the time, you're talking about several years later when, people are coming back and approaching them and trying to talk to them. And, their lives are much different, whether they're together or not, or, different situations happen. So I think that when they were approached at a later time, they were cooperative and willing to answer questions.
Do you remember when you were reviewing this in the initial investigation, if neighbors were talked to? Because isn't that pretty standard procedure? Like something like this happened, you talk to the people in the neighborhood, definitely the neighbors, et cetera. Do you remember that being done in your review of the initial investigation?
I do. And I think sometimes it ends up being kind of like a public misconception. So as an investigator, I get called to the scene. You're at the scene. You're talking to everyone on scene. Well, behind the scenes, a supervisor is directing patrol deputies or other people to go canvass the neighborhood is what it's called. And so they go door to door and ask people if they've heard anything or, whatever the case is. And typically they'll write what's called a supplemental to the report saying who they talked to, what they found. Now it's more important just because everyone has Ring cameras and a lot of stuff gets captured on Ring cameras. And so if you don't canvass the neighborhood, then you may not get that bit of information. And in this case, I do believe neighbors were talked to. And I think even there were a couple that were talked to a couple times. And maybe not necessarily by the investigator at the time, but other members of the sheriff's office.
Hey listeners, Stacey Smith here, co-host of the News and Brews podcast from The Times. While Taken Too Soon dives deep into Hall County's unsolved past, News and Brews keeps you up to speed on what's happening now. Join me and Shannon Casas for quick local news you can trust in the time it takes to grab your morning coffee. Search News and Brews Hall County wherever you get your podcasts or find the link in our show notes. Now back to the show.
When Holly's body was found, it was in an area near her home, but the visibility in that area was poor.
There were no streetlights, no ambient lighting, just rural darkness and tree cover.
It would have been nearly impossible to spot anything at night without a very specific reason to look.
And for people who might not know Oakwood very well or Raintree Trace, how would you describe it? What was the state of that road at the time?
That's a hard question. It was a quiet neighborhood, I would say. It's not like we got a lot of cases out of that neighborhood. Wasn't a common street that you look and you're like, oh, that happened there. No. Okay. It wasn't anything like that. It was more just an older, quiet neighborhood. Not a lot going on from what I remember.
What do you remember about the crime scene, either from you going out to the scene afterward or from the photos that were taken at the time that you go through when you look at the case file? What do you remember?
I remember the road that backs up to the house. And I say backed up to the house, but it was more like, I'm not good with like directional, very directionally challenged. But as far as like yardage, and I have no idea. But there was a pool in the backyard and it was fenced in. And then so behind the fence to the road was, a significant amount of area. There were, if you're looking at the back of the house, there were a little bit of woods to the right and then kind of open. And the backyard area between the fence and the road was also open. It wasn't heavily wooded, and it was also February. So I do remember that, it being very open and not very covered.
During the daytime, the area where Holly was found can be seen from the road running behind the property line. And that is one of the biggest questions about Holly's murder.
With her body being found 5 days after she was reported missing, how had she been on the property without anyone seeing it for so long?
I think in the beginning, it did strike me as weird. Once you drive out there, specifically at night, there are no streetlights. So that road in the back is like pitch black. So at night, it's very dark. Now, obviously 5 days, it's not all night, the full 5 days. Right. So during the day, it's possible. But if that's not like I wouldn't say it's like a main road that people travel to go to work on a regular basis. So the people that travel it are probably people that just travel it frequently and know, when you're driving, you're just kind of like, you're not really paying attention to your surroundings, especially on a road like that. So I think just kind of knowing the area itself, I don't know that it was odd that no one driving by saw her laying there. It's hard to understand the terrain unless you're actually walking it. Just because it seems as if you're driving by and like, oh, if she was right there, then I don't understand why no one saw her right there. But, it's not just straight flat. Obviously there's a hill that goes down, and then there's also, just different divots in the yard. And, some people just, especially people who aren't in law enforcement or investigations or any type of field where you investigate crimes and stuff, like all that's unfamiliar to you. So it's not like you're going to be driving down the road and be like, oh, I think that's a body. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now somebody like me, if I see a trash bag on the side of the road, I'm like, is there a body in that trash bag? Like, why is that trash bag on the side of the road? What time is it? Let me document that in case something comes up. But that's not normal way of thinking.
It would take a phone call from Holly's mom, Wilma, to Dwayne Lackey before Holly was found.
Lackey wasn't on the scene long before he stumbled upon Holly's body, further making us question why she wasn't found earlier.
Despite several attempts to talk with Mr. Lackey, he was uninterested in reliving the discovery of Holly's body and therefore uninterested in talking to us about what he saw.
The mystery of why Holly's body laid on the backside of the property for so long before being discovered remains clouded in darkness.
Were there any items or paraphernalia that were found with the body?
No, not that I remember, except for her glasses. She wore glasses. I remember her glasses being found. And then when she was taken to the medical examiner's office to have the autopsy, her personal effects are given to the family. And I know that there was, obviously besides her clothing and jewelry and her glasses, I think there was maybe a pen that they gave to the family at the time.
And is this like a normal Bic writing pen that we would use in our day-to-day lives?
No, it was just like when you undo a pen and you take out the inside, and it's just, I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it was kind of like that.
Holly's children were young when she died.
But memory is a powerful thing, even in childhood. And what they remembered, they shared.
Professionals trained in child forensic interviewing worked with them gently and patiently. The children's recollections, moments of tension, arguments, strange behavior, became important pieces of the case.
When children are interviewed, they're not just interviewed by, just the investigators in the case. There's a process. And so they were interviewed for that process, where they are interviewed by someone who is trained in talking with kids about trauma. And so Yes, they both were interviewed.
Is this what we usually call like a forensic interview?
It is, yes.
And that's usually done by places like the Edmondson Telford Center for Children or
That's
other,
correct, yes.
They're accredited people that are experienced in how to interview children, discover or see if there's any deception or malingering or coaching or things like that.
Yes, and that also offers families the opportunity to get counseling for their children. Usually when children are interviewed forensically, that allows for the state to be able to pay for some free counseling. So that's always really good too.
We won't share the details of those interviews out of respect for their privacy, but it's clear their voices mattered.
Even when surrounded by silence, children can sometimes shine a light adults choose to ignore.
Hey, true crime junkies of North Georgia, are you aware of what's going on around you? Find out by signing up for our free newsletters from the Times. You'll get local news in your inbox daily, including at least one free article a day about what's happening in Hall County. And now back to the show.
There was no sign of robbery, no valuables missing aside from Holly's phone.
This wasn't a theft gone wrong. It wasn't random.
Whoever killed Holly didn't come for things, they came for her.
Investigators believe Holly knew her killer. That trust, however fractured, may have been her final mistake.
I think that whoever killed Holly knew her, and it wasn't a random act, and someone who probably knew her for a period of time. So I would just say that anyone who worked with her or knew her or knew any of the people that were in the family or associated with her, that they remember a conversation or think they may have told the investigator years ago, tell it again. It may be something that wasn't significant 10 years ago, but now since the investigation has progressed, it might be important now or more helpful at this point. Again, that was 10 years ago, but that conversation may or may not have been documented. We don't know. So tell it again. It's not going to hurt.
Is it possible for you to speak on a little bit as to why you think that it was someone that knew Holly instead of just some kind of random act?
It's more from a personal experience standpoint, just from working cases, I think. One, it's just rare to have a stranger murder. It seems very common when you watch TV shows. It's just someone pops up and kills somebody and then goes about their business. But it's actually very rare that happens. Usually it's always going to be someone that they knew. And it was more of just the scenario of she wasn't robbed. Her car was still there. Her purse was still there. So it wasn't more of someone just killed her because they wanted something specific. And, you asked me about what kind of phone she had. I don't remember the specific type of phone, but it wasn't one of these iPhone 16s. That's $2,000. So it's not like someone killed her just because they wanted her phone and saw her outside, It just seems more of a personal thing than just a random act. And in my experience, if there's been any type of random things, which have been very rare, there's at least some sort of evidence that suggests that. Like there's, a ransom text message or someone brags about it in prison because, it was a gang initiation. They didn't know this person, but they just drove by and popped a round off. You know what I'm saying? So I think because none of those things transpired and it's more of a tight-lipped thing and that it just seems more personal and that someone that killed her knew her.
And in your investigation, I guess you can kind of also tie it with, in your investigation, you kind of learned Holly's habits too. So you knew that she went out to that area to make her phone calls, especially when the kids were asleep, et cetera. So that in and of itself, if you knew that about Holly.
Right. It wasn't, you're not just driving down that road at night randomly looking for someone to hurt or potentially kill. And certainly you're not going to think it's dark, it's pitch black. Like certainly you're not going to think that your person you want to just randomly kill is going to be just hanging out outside in the backyard on the outside of a fence, right. Talking on the phone. So I think, yeah, that's definitely a good point to make, is that another reason why it seems more personal.
So where does that leave us? Ashley Gilleland believes the case can still be solved.
Thanks to advancements in DNA technology, especially familial DNA and trace forensics, the potential for a breakthrough remains real.
And around the time that the private investigators, Alex and John Dahlman, were looking into the case, the sheriff's office made an announcement that they were going to put some new efforts into Holly's case and look at potential DNA technologies. Do you feel that DNA technology and the advancements that we've seen in that field might be the crucial element that leads to justice for Holly?
I think it could be. I think there's a couple things that potentially could be useful in terms of like the DNA technologies. I know that the investigator during that time when Alex and John were kind of helping with the case, I know that they had sent some stuff to a lab in Utah that does a lot of DNA stuff. And so maybe there's stuff in the works now. I don't know. But there probably are a couple other pieces of, evidence that maybe can be used for that.
Do we know what items were of interest in terms of sending off for testing?
The pen that was given to the family after the autopsy was done, I know that was sent off after I investigated. So the next investigator gathered that information and it was sent off for DNA testing. As far as future things go, I can't really speak on things that can be sent, but I think it's good for the general public to know that there are things that can be sent.
Samples were preserved. Time hasn't destroyed all evidence. It's just waiting for the right tool or the right person to come forward.
When we've talked with Wilma and Angela, they have been very appreciative of the work that you did and have gone as far as to say that if you had stayed on the case, if you had been the investigator, that they felt that you would have been the one to solve the case. Did you have that feeling when you were working the case before you moved jobs?
Well, that's very flattering of them to say that. Who knows how true that would be, to be honest. Again, going back to when you're an investigator in a very busy county with 30, 40 cases at a time, with a good number of them being, significant crimes, and then also trying to work on Holly's case, it's still hard to dedicate that time. So do I think it's a solvable case? Yes. But what will it take to get there? I don't know. I think with different things of technology and different applications that can be used now, I think that'll help. And just having an investigator that, can kind of think outside the box in some situations, or just someone coming forward and they heard something that they didn't think was relevant at the time. But now looking back, they're like, oh, wow, like maybe I should have said something, maybe that's what it'll take. I don't know that me personally, if I would have stayed on the case, had it been solved, I don't think that's the case. I think it's just a matter of being able to dedicate time and resources. I think that's what's important in this case.
And so to put some of that in context, before you moved to Barrow about 5 or 6 years ago, how many cases were you working? How many new cases are getting put on the pile every week? And how many hours are you putting in?
I would say average, maybe 30 cases a month. I remember when I was there, I think there were 8 investigators and we would rotate on call. So every 7 weeks, we'd have a whole week of on call. And so that could be, you get called out once to something small, or you get called out 3 and 4 times to large cases that you're now having to generate a lot of time for. I remember one time I got called out to a murder, and then the next day, I believe there was a rape. And then 2 days later, there was like a very significant child molestation case. And all those are very large, time-consuming cases. So I think that, I don't know if it's gone up or down. I don't know if they've added more investigators. So that also could change things. But I mean, I was putting in overtime pretty much every pay period.
50 hours a week, 55 hours a week.
I would probably say 50 to 60 hours per week would probably be even an average. Of course, I was younger then and I was like real excited and wanted to do all those extra hours. Like if I was in it now, you wouldn't probably have to do those hours.
Holly Fox Strickland was 32 years old, a mother, a daughter, a woman whose life was stolen and whose story still needs to be told.
I mean, it seemed like Wilma and Angela had a great relationship with Holly. I have a sister myself, so I can't imagine losing my sister, and then, Wilma, she had her days. Like there would be days where she would call and just be super upset and frustrated and angry. And you'd kind of have to talk her down and say, I know I can't say that I understand your frustration, but we are working and we're trying and we're doing these things. And so I think that she was just hurt, I mean, I can't imagine losing a child and then just not knowing.
If you have any information about the murder of Holly Fox Strickland, we urge you to contact law enforcement or email podcastadmin@gainesvilletimes.com. That's podcastadmin @gainesvilletimes.com, or submit an anonymous tip.
Your silence could be protecting someone who doesn't deserve it. Next time, we'll sit down with Dr. John Hager of the University of North Georgia, who will break down Holly's autopsy. And we'll hear from one of Holly's friends who tries to keep her memory alive all these years later.
If you like the Taken Too Soon podcast, be sure to give us a rating wherever you listen.
The music in this podcast was by Ben Ingram.
Thank you for listening. This has been Taken Too Soon, a podcast by The Times.